I've just discovered something very, very interesting concerning the sleep circuit. The grounding is extra, although it helps. But concerning the orientation of polarity, I used to believe, or I used to submit the idea to you that normal polarity is to put positive at the head and negative at the feet, because that's the way Becker said it was, for relaxation. And I just assumed that the evaluation of that statement based on Leon Ernest Eamon's cooperative healing was that that was normal, and that only conditions of stress, such as PTSD or anything else, hiccups, cold condition, in which the apana flows upward rather than its normal downward flow, and the udana flows downward rather than upward, in other words inverted along the spine. I thought that was the only condition in which we should invert polarity and put negative at the head and positive below the head, such as at the pelvic region or the feet, because I learned that that inverted position could cure a person of vertigo, panic attacks. But I did a video on direction of spin, the biannual reversal of spin, based on the solar and lunar path, namely the two halves of the year separated by the two solstices, so that the lunar path is the 6 months from the June 21st to December 21st, between the summer solstice and the winter solstice, and the solar path is the other half of the year, between December 21st and June 21st, between the winter solstice and the summer solstice. And if you die, Charlie Lutz would sometimes say, during the period of the waning solar influence, then you go the lunar path, and it's not as good as dying during the half of the year in which the days are getting longer. Then you go the solar path in the interlife between, after you leave this body. And that's a much more favorable condition to be in. Obviously, your karma sets you up for that. Well, I created a biannual flipping of the reversal of this based on the determination of which direction the Earth spins. And so the solar path, you go in conjunction with that. But during the lunar half of the year, you go contrary. So since I'm north of the equator, when seen from below, if we were to position this above the North Pole, this is going opposite to the spin of the Earth, because right now it's the tail end of the month of July. And so I'm having that spin contrary to this spin direction of the Earth, which is appropriate for this time of year. Well, I realize now we can do the same thing with the bed circuit, because there's no current. It's all voltage. It's all about polarity. So just as this has a kind of polarity to it, which is one way or the other, there's only two choices, this also has only two choices. Normal is to put positive at the head and negative at the feet, and contrary is to invert that. So I can apply to this the same 12-month calendar schedule as I'm getting out of that. So this is what I've done. I've created two diagrams, one for the solar path period of the year and one for the lunar path of the year. And this explains why I tend to get asthma during this time of the year, in the fall, because it's a condition in which my apana and udana pranas are inverted from normalcy. Instead of the apana going down and the udana going up, they invert. A perverted inversion. So what I learned from Leon Ernest Eamon is you mirror that. You duplicate that. And by doing that, he said, the body will automatically recognize the injustice it's doing to itself and revert back to normalcy. But I'm beginning to suspect that we have to put ourselves through normalcy versus non-normalcy on purpose, 6 months for each. And I say this for a reason. There's an idea from yoga called the left-hand path versus the right-hand path. The right-hand path is you do everything conforming to society. Okay? The left-hand path, you do everything the opposite. Whatever's normal, you do the opposite. And both paths are valid. There's nothing wrong with either one. You choose the path, though, you got to stick with it. Well, here, what I'm doing is, I don't stick with it because I give a timeliness to it. There's a time to be born and a time to die. You know that song that comes out of the Ecclesiastes? Turn, 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 do everything unto its season. A time for war, a time for peace, a time for love, a time for hate. You know, do everything. And, you know, it's that idea that there's a time for everything. It's a time-oriented phenomenon. So right now, I'm feeling like this is the best setup because I have a cold condition from having taken 2 baths in silver hydroperoxide with MSM megadose. Okay? And that humbled me. And then I realized when Charlie Lutz said that the last virtue that most people learn before they become enlightened is the lesson on humility. And I began to think to myself, after I took my 2 baths, I was humbled by a cold condition. And I realized that the only reason why humility is the last virtue or lesson that we give ourselves to learn is because we never bothered to learn it in the first place. If we had bothered to learn that lesson in our very first incarnation as a human being, we never would have had to learn any other lesson. That lesson trumps all others and does not require that we learn any other lessons. Just that one. But if we fail to learn that lesson, then we simply put it off. And then we have to learn all these other lessons that makes life more complicated. It's very simple. Humility. It's the simplest lesson, yet we keep putting it off, and so that's why it's the last one when it was the first originally. So the bath put me in a state of humility. It put me in a state of innocence like that of a baby, because it was nourishing me so efficiently, making 5 gallons at a time of silver hydroperoxide with MSM and putting it into the bath, that I came to know that my physiology was contrary. I had already reversed the spin on this, but I wasn't doing the sleep circuit, which is actually more powerful than that. That's subtle. It's good, it's valid, but it's subtle. But this is much more powerful. A lot more cheaper for those of us, you know, to acquiesce to. $20 for 100 resistors at 100 mega ohms each. Use maybe 50 of them or whatever. A AA battery, some clip leads, some cardboard and tape. Okay, you got to make. Well, you could go to Kmart and get 2 pillowcases and get some foil duct tape from the hardware store, and instead of using an earthing pillowcase and an earthing bed pad, whatever, be that as it may. It's the simplest way to program the body to do what's seasonally correct for that time of the year, according to whether or not that half of the year is the lunar half or the solar half, the waning duration of the day versus the waxing duration of the time spent in which the sun is above the horizon. So here I have the battery polarity reversed from normal, in which positive now is going to the feet and negative is going to the head. While during the solar path, I have the normal polarity in which positive goes to the head. According to Becker, according to Eamon, they both concur that the head is positive versus the pelvic region, which is negative, a la Leon Ernest Eamon. And Becker goes a step further and says, well, the limbs are more negative than are the torso or head. So that means by extension the feet are even more negative than the pelvic region. Okay? So, but he still is saying the same thing. But that's the solar path, the solar half of the year between December 21st and June 21st. So now I think I've finally completed this circuit and what it means to be in a circuit of this type, because that's what it amounts to. It's a seasonal variation of normal versus not normal prana, the flow of prana. Does the udana go up the spine? Excuse me. Does the udana go up the spine and the apana, the elimination, go down the spine, the udana being thinking? Or does it invert itself in a perverted fashion, in which thoughts hither downwards and elimination gets shoved up to the head? People puke, they hiccup. Anything that's not normal when it comes to elimination that normally would travel down the torso, instead it wants to come upwards. And thoughts, maybe not being lofty and idealistic, instead they're very concrete and visceral because they're traveling down the spine to the lower chakras. It all has to do with the flow of prana, but specifically udana versus apana. And that's how I interpret this situation, but I never interpreted it in terms of time, in terms of the seasons of the year. But this is the way it would be applied to the seasons of the year, and this completes the whole application of how do you use these two circuits. By subjecting the body to these two polarizations equally, for equal length of the year, just specifically 2 halves of the year. And which half is it? So there you go. It's so simple and it's so straightforward, it's unbelievable. You still have the same circuit, the same resistance. It could be more ohms, could be slightly less, but we want the amperage to be down in the picoamp range. And the voltage shouldn't be any different, than between 1 and 1.5 volts. It doesn't need to be any higher. It's just the polarity. And the earthing bed sheet and the grounding rod, that's extra, but it's good. It's a good enhancement to bring the earth into the situation. So that's basically it. That's how to look at this situation.